So you got a big superhero film where the original director gets ousted, and a brand new director is brought in to finish the film. But it's not until many years later, after a lot of fan outcry, that you finally get to see the original vision of the original director. So let's talk all about the Richard Lester and Richard Donner versions of Superman 2. In thwarting a radical group at the Eiffel Tower, Superman launches their hydrogen bomb into space, where its explosion intersects with the Phantom Zone, which inadvertently releases the 3 Kryptonian villains who were once imprisoned there by Jor-el. Meanwhile, the criminal mastermind Lex Luthor plots his escape from his own prison, having a northbound trail to follow to discover the secrets of Superman at the Fortress of Solitude. While on assignment for the Daily Planet in Niagara Falls, a peculiar relationship develops as it dawns on the dogged Lois Lane that Clark Kent may indeed be the Man of Steel. A harrowing gamble down the rapids is creatively resolved by Clark, without exposing his secret identity. However, an awkward trip and fall into a fireplace forces the issue, as Clark reluctantly reveals himself, and Lois declares her love for him. At the same time, General Zod and his Kryptonian cohorts quickly wreak havoc to astronauts on the moon, and possessing the same powers on Earth as the son of Jor-el, they soon land in a small American town, which they quickly bring to its knees, despite the efforts of the military. Meanwhile, Clark and Lois engage in romance at the Fortress of Solitude, but Kal-El soon learns that if he's to be with a mortal woman, he must give up his powers and become mortal himself. However, once they return to Metropolis, Clark is beaten up by a lecherous trucker and learns that the world leaders have surrendered authority to General Zod, who calls out the so-called Superman to challenge his authority. Now faced with the short-sightedness of his actions, Clark desperately treks back to the fortress hoping to restore his powers and save humanity from his father's arch-nemesis, who have joined forces with Lex Luthor, who knows all the secrets that could put the son of Jor-El and all those who he cares about into dire peril. So the $300 million box office success of Superman the movie ultimately guaranteed the completion and release of Superman 2, which hit cinemas in Australia and other foreign territories in late 1980, rolled out to UK cinemas in April of 1981, and ultimately debuted in the United States on June 19th of 1981. And it's fairly well documented that Alexander and Ilya Salkind, along with Warner Brothers, put up the money to have Superman the movie produced alongside its sequel to be shot simultaneously, but when things started going a little bit over budget and a little bit over schedule, they decided to stop production completely on the second film and focus completely on the first film so they get that out to cinemas and get their money back at the box office. But it was a whole thing when they decided to start ramping up production again for the sequel. There had always been this little bit of tension between director Richard Donner and the Salkinds, as well as producer Piers Spengler. And so they ended up having this whole thing where they just kind of got rid of Donner. They sent him this little telegram saying his services would no longer be required. And they got the line producer that they hired to be this intermediary between themselves and Donner to step up into the director's share of the film, that being Richard Lester, who had a really good working relationship with the Salkinds. They had produced a number of his films before, and they just had a very good understanding between them, and very much an economical director to step up into the film to finish up what they needed to finish. And this just became kind of a point of contention for certain people like Gene Hackman. All his stuff was shot only with Donner. He never worked with Lester whatsoever. And Margot Kerr was very much unhappy about the situation, but she did continue on with the rest of the project. And this whole thing where just like Richard Donner becomes such a sort of patriarch of the entire project. He created such a family atmosphere, such a warmth in what he did. He created this entire thing. He was the one who shepherded it, had so much of the driving force and such a love for it. He created this atmosphere that everyone was so enveloped in that you got rid of him. It changes the tone a little bit. And obviously Richard Lester is a guy who has a different mentality of how he approaches the material and doesn't have the deep down beloved quality for the character that Donner had. So a lot of things started kind of changing here and there, and they kind of alter concepts and different things, and Obviously, for Richard Lester to get actual credit as the sole director of the film, he has to have directed more than 50% of it, so he had to go back, rework and reshoot scenes that Donald already did, and so they kind of altered the entire first act of the film. They created this entire Eiffel Tower terrorist bombing sequence that starts off the film really goddamn hot with a really good action sequence. Superman charging into danger, all these different things, heroic acts. It just creates an energy that I think this version of the film really does benefit from. But there is the whole thing of Marlon Brando here, and why he's not in the Lester version. Because the first film started going over budget, they wanted to cut costs on the sequel here, and Brando would have required a bigger paycheck. He would have required a percentage of the profits off the second film if they used his footage. And so they reworked things to make it that we're not having Jor-El in this film. We're going to have Kal-El's mother of Laura here be the one to counsel him on the advice of love life and stuff like that, all these things. And feel the things with like the Kryptonian Council stuff that gets replicated in other Superman sequels. Just an interesting type of thing, how they cut that stuff out, where I think it does kind of work. Doesn't work nearly as well as having Brando there into the film to have the power of his performance added in there. And just like this whole thing where Richard Lester kind of has this entire, much more of a comedy approach to things. So that kind of weaves its way into the film to make it a little bit more campy and a little bit silly in some places, and certainly all the stuff with the kind of weird powers that start manifesting with the Kryptonians, that gets much more egregious as you get further into the film. It's a little bit looser. He kind of plays fast and loose with everything, and that doesn't quite make for the most consistent thing going from the first film into the sequel. And so there's a lot of things to get into in that regard, and how the two different directors have a different sensibility and they affect different things in different ways, looking at both versions of the film. But with Lester's version being the one that was theatrically released at the time and basically the only version available for 25 years, it did go over well. It didn't get as much box office as the first film, but $190 million off of a $54 million budget is absolutely nothing going to cry about. It was well received. It was very much a crowd-pleasing film that delivers what you want with a sequel. You get more action, bigger set pieces, more character development, more character exploration, deeper themes, more emotion, stuff like that. It just built on what the first film had. It just expanded the story, expanded the character, still delivered very good performances. And that leads you into Christopher Reeve, who every single time he stepped into this role maintained a dignity, integrity, and a respect for the character himself. He never lowered his standards of the quality of his performance stepping onto the screen as Superman. And that shows you so much here. Just the fact that once you've gotten through the production of the first film, he's gotten on such a solid level. He's gotten everything right in place to be very confident on screen, to handle more material, get things a little bit more, progress further through the character arcs that Superman and Clark Kal-El have to go through in this film. So Chris Reeve is on such a magnificent level on this film. He just delivers so much. Like, again, every time you see him in that suit on screen, just like it just propels the film forward. It just propels yourself into the narrative. You're just so captivated by everything he does as Superman. It just soars and flies all over the place so beautifully. But again, I like how the film just has more emotion for the character to deal with. You've got all the stuff kind of developing with between Clark and Lois, Superman, all that stuff. And just get this exploration of this love story, this romance is kind of weeding its way through everything. Because you got everything with Lois trying to figure all the little things out, kind of getting it dawned on her that maybe these two are the same person here. And so all these little things that you have going on in this entire storyline, dealing with the two of them, how it's kind of progressing, and how you see these wonderful, subtle little pieces of affection that Clark has when he's kind of bumbling around everything, where Chris Reeve is in that guise of the character. You can see that he loves Lois. But as the character of Clark, where he's kind of this disheveled type of mess of a guy, very socially awkward style of the character, he can't just kind of be Mr. Confident, kind of walk up to her and say all these wonderful things about how he feels about her. And even as Superman, it's a little bit more complicated in that type of way, where it's like, he knows that Lois is so kind of gushingly in love about Superman just in his presence, and likes so much how that kind of works for their chemistry in the whole film, how Christopher Reeve portrays these aspects in so many different facets, and just get all these wonderful little moments as the romance continues to build and stuff like that, as they break through that awkwardness. Up to the point where, in the lesser cut, you've got Clark goes to the Fortress of Solitude, talks with the projection of his mother, and finds out if he's going to be with a mortal woman, he has to depower himself, become a mortal man himself, which is a wonderful piece of story progression here, because parallel to that, you've got the entire building threat of Zod in the whole film. The 3 Kryptonian villains are now wreaking havoc on the world unbeknownst to Clark. So just it's wonderful for the audience to see that sort of parallel thing going on in the movie, the building threat and the thing where it's just like, oh, the hero's gonna sacrifice something that's gonna be a detriment, that's gonna ruin the world. And so it's a wonderful piece of building drama in the whole film to have all that stuff going on, and to you see how everything weaves through and builds up towards the end of the film, and getting all this stuff going with Margot Kidder, who does a wonderful performance in this whole film, just having this strength and sweetness to her at the same time that, again, you see all the different qualities of this character of Lois Lane, just like she's brash, she's impulsive, she's a little bit ahead of herself in some places, but she's smart, she's sharp, she's just ambitious and passionate about things. Just like I love how everything kind of moves forward and kind of gets all the character traits just in the right way to weave into this situation. I like all this stuff, and I just love this whole moment where the reveal actually happens, where Clark trips over the thing on the floor and goes in the fire, and this whole exchange there is like, you didn't get burned when you put your hand in the fire, and this wonderful moment where he just storms off all frustrated and everything, and just the posture change and the turn and all these different things just shows the acting quality of Christopher Reeve in this character. He could just meld the performance on the moment to change from one persona to the next and reveal himself that, like, he is Superman, and just like the wonderful quality, like, I don't know if I actually did that on purpose or not. Was there a subconscious thing in him bumbling around and kind of doing this thing to kind of accidentally reveal himself to her, because he has that love, he has that affection, he wants to be with this woman, doesn't know how to express it in this complex secret identity situation he has. I like how much that acting quality comes out in that scene. Just wonderful stuff, just all over the place. Chris Reeve is magnificent in this film. He hits it all on the top levels. He makes this film just a fantastic experience working with his character, again, digging deeper, more depth, more things to work with. It's just the right thing to do with a sequel, to expand the character, not just another adventure, but get more into the character and have him grow and have him learn stuff, go through an arc where he has to face consequences of his decisions and stuff like that, and deal with the struggles of his personal desires versus his obligation to humanity. He learns something through the consequences of the situations that he faced through the entire story here. I like that quality, and just feel so rewarding to see that arc take place throughout the entire course of this film and see a growth with the character. But moving on so much, I just love Gene Hackman. The guy's a phenomenal actor, and just like his Lex Luthor gets better every time I see it. Everything he does, the more I can appreciate the quality of what he puts into an acting performance. He's so absolutely brilliant. I love how having Lex back in this film. I love that they carried him on from the first film to this one, because obviously originally the two films were kind of meant as part one, part two, kind of extensions of the same story. So you keep Lex Luthor in there. That's wonderful. I love that you have that, because it's a nice counterbalance with the Zod character. All that stuff with him and Ursa and Nan, it's a nice counterbalance. It gives the little bit of a levity to everything. I love the charisma that Hackman puts on this whole thing. I love just the integration of the characters so much into the story. It feels very organic, because he's positioned himself in such a great area of this story to make him such a vital cog, that he owns all the chips, because he has information, he has knowledge that is important and is dangerous to have. And so I love that he can constantly pull those little strings, constantly tug here and there. It's like he's got such the ego about him, the arrogance of some sort, just like the quality that he has, this hubris, that he constantly says all these sort of just antagonizing things to Zod, and Zod just constantly has these reactions, like he literally says in the film, "Why do you say these things when you know I'd kill you for?" It's like, Luthor, because he's so smart, he feels like he's so far ahead of the game. It's like, I love that Lex is so just pinpoint on the money about every single thing, and he's just a brilliant character. The brilliant comedy beats. Again, all of his stuff was shot by Donner, so you can see that Donner handles comedy very, very well. Again, when you watch all those Lethal Weapon films, he handles comedy so extremely well, melded with other tones and genres, such an organic fashion, how he moves between that stuff. I love that he does that stuff with Gene Hackman. It's just absolutely fantastic, and just like, again, Stamp is so cold, chilling. The intimidation factor of these three has stuck with me since childhood. Watching this whole film since I was a kid, these three have scared me more than a few times. Seeing them on screen, how they're portrayed, how they're presented, they're just intimidating. Just really, just impressive work casting. Terence Stamp, Sarah Douglas, Jack O'Halloran, and I like so much how Ursa is always playing towards like the she wants that admiration from Zod. She's willing to do whatever it takes to kind of get that sort of thing from him. Just like, and he's kind of got a vanity to himself as well. It's like, I love that whole moment where camera crew shows up at the little Texas town, and he starts checking himself in the camera viewfinder and all this type of stuff. Just like little things. He's always want to make sure that if he's going to be the ruler, he wants to make sure that people are seeing the exact image of him that he wants to project out there. It's like these little things. He has that wonderful quality about himself that he can bring you into the film with doing the low-key stuff. He doesn't have to yell and bark every single time he's on screen, because that makes it more impactful when he does get riled in the film, where he gets a little bit more hot-blooded in some places. All the other times he's cold, calculating, cool and stuff like that. He's very much the guy, kind of the iron fist, kind of squeezing it down here and there, just wants everyone to bow at his feet, kneel before Zod. Wonderful stuff. Just like Terence Stamp is just this eclectic, wonderful actor who can do so much great stuff. I love Sarah Douglas. She's just got this wonderful, again, this sensual quality about herself. She just carries herself in such a way that feels just very alluring in such a way, but she has a forcefulness about herself. I love this entire thing that she constantly does throughout the whole film, where she's pulling people's like emblems or badges or stuff like that off their uniforms. Like this defiance of authority that you might have. She kind of crushes it in a certain way. She kind of adopts it to herself. There's certain moments where she's actually like wearing like the general sort of medals, stuff like that on herself. Wonderful type of stuff. Just like these little pieces of character that gives a little bit more to her. Jack O'Halloran, just like this beast of a man, having him as like this sort of mute sort of thug in the whole thing, just like he's scary looking. He's a scary looking dude in this film. Non is kind of terrifying in and of himself, just being that big guy with a beard and everything, just like he's scary in certain points that really do something really good with these characters that, again, from childhood onwards, they've kind of scared the crap out of me in a lot of cases. So it's like they've done a really good piece of work. And a little bit of a funny thing with the vocals they've done here, because Terence Stamp's voice was actually pitched down to make it much more bassy and more booming overall, just give it more of that chilling presence overall. But Sarah Douglas's dialogue was actually dubbed by another actress because they felt like maybe Douglas's voice was not strong enough overall. I kind of disagree about that. She's a very good actress, definitely deserves that credit. But actually was dubbed by Annie Ross, who would play one of the villains in the following Superman movie. So it's kind of an interesting thing in there, and obviously Jack O'Halloran really doesn't have any dialogue whatsoever. There's a few grunts and squeals here and there, so he didn't have much to worry about in that regard. But all the returning supporting cast members of this film just do a wonderful job overall. Just Jackie Cooper, Marc McClure, Ned Beatty, Valerie, Perrine, everyone across the board in this whole film nails some excellent performances, really memorable characters, tied in with a great story in this whole thing. They did a wonderful job regardless of who's directing what scenes. The performances come off very, very well, so I think that's a testament to both directors. Still got very good performances out of everyone involved with this production. One person not returning from the first film is John Williams, because for a reason, whether it was creative differences, scheduling type of things, he's not really sure. He decided to pass on this film. And so Richard Lesser brought in his previous collaborator of Ken Thorne to adapt John Williams' stuff into this film, and does a pretty damn good job of it. Despite the mix in the film, not doing the best job of replicating his work, because I guess on the more remastered soundtracks you've gotten from Film Score Monthly and more recently La La Land Records, sounds much better, much fuller, much better type of thing. Even though he doesn't have as big of an orchestra as Williams had before, he still does a good job. He kind of speeds up the tempo, some of the cues, some of the themes here and there. He does a really good job to make it fit, to make it all work for the film. He just uses all the themes in just the right type of ways to meld them into the scenes and make all the nuances come out and elicit the proper emotions in the different places. So he uses Williams stuff, adds in a little bit of extra stuff for himself, and does a really good job to make this film feel very consistent on that regard from the first film. I like that fact, because we do get a lot of like superhero films today, like they'll establish a theme in the first film, then you'll get a different composer and they'll change everything up and they won't remain consistent, stuff like that. So it's nice that that continues on through this entire Christopher Reeve franchise. You maintain those themes regardless of who's doing the score. And in regards to the visual effects of this film, they basically had the exact same team from the first film, but having to do a lot of different stuff in this whole thing. I do think there's a progression in the effects work, especially with the resolution of a lot of the rear projection and the composite plates that they did. I think they used a much higher resolution film stock to get a better quality overall doing that type of stuff. And they do a lot more explosive type of things, because now you've got all the big action sequences, all the super powered battles and everything in Metropolis, stuff like that. So they had to do a lot more ambitious stuff. They had to use every little thing they had, from the rear projection to the blue screen stuff to miniatures, model work, painted backdrop. So it's a menagerie of different things they had to place together to make these big action sequences function. And certainly as time goes on, you can kind of see, yeah, that's like a backdrop behind Zod and company as they're doing the whole super breath type of thing. You can kind of pick up little things as you kind of look them back on like 40-year-old eyes. But for the time, the stuff was very impressive. It was very good quality work that definitely pleased audiences, get all this big slam bang action stuff, and like they don't get as much sort of like wonderful, dynamic, beautiful, elegant sort of flying shots they had in the first film, because again, it's much more focused on like slam bang action, thrilling type of stuff instead of the beauty of showing you that a man could fly. It was much more focused on different types of things for the effects. So I think they did a pretty nice job, even though the blue screen stuff really is kind of the least impressive stuff. There really is sort of a thing where the color grading kind of falls off here and there. But regardless of that, everything else holds up very, very nicely. But just talking overall about Richard Lester's version of this film, I think it's a very good version of the film. I don't have a lot of problems with it, aside from the really silly, ridiculous powers that were manifested for the characters of the Kryptonians, and a lot of the campy beats of comedy that easily I think could be removed from a much more tonally strong type of film. I think it comes off very well. I think he's a very solid, competent, talented director to get a lot of things right with this film, that even though a lot of the people kind of focus on the campy elements that he adds into the film, he still directs some very strong, dramatic scenes in this movie that come off extremely well. There's like, he knew how to work with the actors, allow them to do a little bit of improv type of stuff in some places to get a little bit of a camaraderie going with all of them, kind of a easy working relationship to move forward on some of these scenes, and just really dialed in on the character moments when he had to. So he's a very solid director, and he moved the story forward and put all the pieces together for something that is a very good type of film that builds on a lot of stuff from the first film and does a little bit of a shift in the tonal change of things, because that's just basically the type of film that Richard Lester was more adept at. That was more the flavor that he kind of injected into his style of films, to have a little bit more humor, a little bit more levity, stuff like that, a little bit of jokey type of things going on in the whole film. But I think he delivered a really solid piece of work here, regardless of those little things. And probably not till a lot of years later on that anyone really kind of started having issues with it as they started growing up and having their taste kind of develop. And obviously when things got a little more revealed about Richard Donner's involvement in the film and lack thereof, ultimately he came through with a good film that I think really held up very nicely on most levels. But obviously in 2006 we received a Richard Donner cut of Superman 2, after many years of fans, after they started congregating on the internet and sharing information and learning more about what happened in the production, knew that Donner had a version of this film that he wanted to make that he wasn't allowed to make. But one of the impasses they had over the time was the amount of money they would have had to pay Marlon Brando and eventually his estate to use the footage in the film. Now, obviously, Superman Returns went into production about the same time, and Bryan Singer wanted to use the Brando footage to link back to Richard Donner's mythology. And so they eventually paid it up and used it for Superman Returns, and then they got the full access for it for Donner to create his own version of the film. Now, this was kind of headed up by Michael Thaw, who was not the most experienced editor. He had a lot of like apprentice editor credits and assistant editor credits and stuff like that. He hadn't really edited a whole lot of big projects over his career. But he headed this whole thing up. He worked with Richard Donner before a little bit here and there. And they kind of moved forward to create his version of the film, which does become a complicated process because, again, as I said earlier with Richard Lester, he had to shoot a certain amount of the film to be credited as the sole director. Now, with Donner having shot less footage than Lester had, that becomes a bigger problem. So you have to do certain things kind of creatively or more inventively to create a version of this film where it has less of Lester's footage and a majority of stuff directed by Richard Donner. Now, it's all the stuff done with Hackman, all the stuff on the moon with Zod, Ursa, and Nan, a couple of little scenes, especially the Brando footage, was all shot by Donner. So there is a substantial amount, but you have to do a certain amount of creative cutting down of the Lester stuff to create a more percentage for Donner's stuff. So that kind of creates a very interesting examination of this whole thing, because also there are certain scenes that they didn't actually shoot with Donner, but they did screen tests with him. So they end up splicing in stuff from screen tests between Margot Kidder and Christopher Reeve. And so as the film explains itself at the beginning, this is not the most complete product. This is not the best version of what Richard Donner would have wanted if he had actually gotten the chance to shoot the entire film himself. So you can basically have to look at this version of the film as sort of a rough sketch of what Richard Donner would have done with Superman 2 had he gotten the entire carte blanche to do what he wanted to do in the first place before Richard Lester came in and they made all different changes to the script, altered the first act of the movie, because in Donner's version, there is no Eiffel Tower sequence. None of that exists in it. It all kind of starts out kind of like a second part of a two-part story. It starts out with the character dynamics between Lois and Clark. Lois kind of jumping directly into the thick of the entire situation of trying to expose the secret identity aspect by throwing herself out the window of the Daily Planet, thinking like Clark's just going to turn to Superman, swoop in there, and everything's going to be hunky-dory, exposed for her and all that type of stuff. But obviously, Clark finds creative ways, as he does in the Lester version in Niagara Falls, to kind of avert that situation from being a disastrous one and revealing himself. And there are certain changes done to the story because of the integration of new footage and removal of other stuff, where again, the stuff with Lois and Clark kind of goes off on a different track to get to the kind of the same result. And some way I don't really like as much how the Donner stuff plays out, because the stuff in the Lester version feels very kind of playful in a certain way. It's like Lois is kind of playing it up and kind of almost like jabbing and kind of teasing Clark about the whole situation. In Donner's version, it feels a lot more kind of like it's just Lois Lane. She's got to crack a story. Even though it's like not saying that she's going to write about it in the newspapers, but it feels like the same Lois Lane that's going to crack the big headlines and whatnot, and she's going to do that. So it's like it's not as much of the vibe is different in that regard. So it's like it comes out to this point in the test screen footage where it plays out differently how she gets him to reveal his identity, where she pulls a gun on him, fires at him. He thinks that, okay, you fired a bullet at me, that pretty much reveals that I'm Superman. Then she says, well, it was loaded with blanks and everything. So I know that if Donner had actually shot it during a principal photography, it would have come off maybe a little bit differently. They would have probably played around with tone and the execution here and there, but just like as the rough sketch, I don't know how much I'd like the idea of it. I kind of like how things go off again with the Lester cut, where the entire scene and the honeymoon suite is more of an acting moment than the kind of like narrative reveal type of thing. It's more acting based than anything else. But there is the whole issue of having to trim down more of the Lester footage so Donner gets the larger percentage of stuff that he shot in the film, which probably comes to a whole thing with, like, I don't know if him trimming out so much of Lester stuff is an artistic decision or just a decision based on the DGA rules, because a lot of the stuff ends up getting truncated a lot in this whole thing, which kind of messes up the entire flow of the film. especially in the middle section of it when they go to East Houston, Idaho, and you got this whole thing where Zod, Ernest, and Nine kind of show up and encounter the sheriff and the deputy. You cut to the Fortress of Solitude for like a minute, and then after that, the camera crew is already there, and they've already wreaked havoc on this place already, so it's like a big, huge jump in time that just does not flow properly as a chronology of events in the film. It just doesn't make sense. So if you're just watching the Donner cut in isolation, like, okay, well, it does feel weird that it just jumps all the way to the end there without kind of a build towards that end. But if you also watch the lesser version, you know, like, there's like 10 tons of footage that just got cut out of this whole thing. So there's a lot of places where the lesser stuff is not re-edited. It's just truncated. The scenes are just cut off at a certain point and kind of affects the overall flow of the entire film from one scene to the next. There's not always a consistent segue and transition of tone that I feel the film really could definitely benefit from. But the stuff with Brando is exceptional work, because Brando was one of the best actors out there. Everything he did with his entire performance in this version of the film rings so absolutely true. I just love the entire sequence of everything that it's Reeve and Brando there, whereas the visual effects composite version of Brando or Brando in person there at the end, everything strikes off on such a magnificent chord there, even though a lot of that stuff with Reeve was shot much earlier in production, and like when he goes to the fortress at the end where he's trying to regain his powers after you've learned of his fatal mistake, I don't think his performance is as strong as it ends up being in the lesser cut, which was shot much later on, where I think Reeve had a little bit of a stronger hold on his performance and his way of carrying himself on screen. I think it's much stronger in the lesser cut, his reactions to the grief and the sacrifice and the mistakes he made. But the Brando stuff is just priceless stuff. He's just absolutely fantastic. I love the whole thing where Clark is going through the depowering sequence. You just got this wonderful little kind of side eye that Jor-el has towards Lois, this sort of artificial construct of Jor-el's consciousness, and just like looking at her and just having this sort of accusatory sensibility towards her, like, you're responsible for this. You better be willing to accept the consequences of whatever happens because of this. And it's a wonderful piece of work that's just so beautifully Richard Donner, and you can tell so much, like in certain scenes like that, what Donner brought to it. You can just pinpoint the quality of what Donner shot along with its DP, Jeffrey Unsworth. You can see that kind of low angle shot in the Fortress of Solitude looking up at Lois, this wonderful widescreen shot. It just has a cinematic sense about it. So much what Donner shot does have a certain sensibility, just has more dynamic qualities about how it is photographed. It comes off very well, and just like the Metropolis battle in the film is the superior version in the Donner version. How they edited that, how they put that together is a much tighter, leaner, more focused type of way. I think it just hits off so much better than it was in the lesser cut, because again, they cut out all the little campy, little goofy type of slapstick type of things, made it more tonally consistent. I just think it's just better constructed, better edited in general, that comes off very well. And the conclusion of the film in the Fortress of Solitude in Donner's version is also the superior version in my opinion, because again, none of those stupid silly powers, no more super powered battles or anything like that. It's all character based. It's all based on the quality of the acting and how you built up these characters and the conflicts between them. It's much more based on that, which I find much more satisfying. I just like how it all develops and kind of executes and stuff like that. It gets to the same point again, but in a better way. It's just a better, more consistent type of way. Again, it feels like Donner, focusing on the characters and what that means about the entire story, how that builds up. It's not about the flashy stuff anymore. It's about resolving the issues with the characters. And that works so very well in his version. But again, there's some things that are not so great in Donner's version. One of them is the score here, because they removed pretty much just about all of Ken Thorne's stuff. There's still a few pieces and bits here and there, but they kind of copy and pasted and spliced together like cues from John Williams' score from the first film, so it's not scored properly. It's not edited very well either. It's just the fact that, okay, you're just kind of slapping the stuff on here to kind of patch it into the framework of the film, where you lose the nuance that Ken Thorne was able to do scoring the scene itself. Williams' work cannot be disputed in any regard at all, period, but the fact that it's just not a proper score for this version of the film is a detriment to itself. And again, there's some places where the editing of the music is very obvious and not well handled. They'll kind of like just jarringly splice together the same note over and over again, and just it doesn't sound good. It's not a good representation of the work. And the visual effects are a really mixed bag in this version because they're trying to approximate late 70s, early 80s visual composite shots with modern digital technology, and some of the stuff in the Fortress of Solitude is okay. It's not great, but it's good. But then you got the stuff on the other hand of things, where it's a really kind of striking type of thing, how a lot of them just aren't very goddamn good. Like, all the stuff in space looks like fucking atrocious crap to me. All the space backgrounds just look like a freaking Windows 95 screensaver. It looks terrible. Awful. Whether it's standard def or high def, I've watched them both. It does not look good. I don't understand why it doesn't look good. I'm just kind of confounded by the fact that a lot of these effects don't hold up. They're not very good. I just like thinking towards other films that were made somewhere in this era and then gotten these wonderfully restored versions later on. It didn't seem like they gave as much money to this film to just make it the best experience possible. They could have done some really fantastic stuff with the visual effects to make them seamless, because again, Star Trek the Motion Picture did the exact same thing, created brand new visual effects shots that blended so almost seamlessly with the stuff done back in the late 70s. It's beautiful type of stuff. Blade Runner has such an amazing type of way of having this extensive way of redoing effects and patching up continuity issues and doing all these wonderful things that make it an immaculate experience to see this thing. Remastered in 4K, all this type of stuff. Again, even Highlander 2, one of the worst goddamn sequels of all time, got itself re-edited with brand new tons of visual effects that look wonderful. And this film did not get that much attention, did not get that much care to have the volume of people involved with it. And also, like I said, Michael Thal, he's a fine editor, but he doesn't have the deep down, intricate experience that you'd really need for someone to head this project up to make sure it comes off as the smoothest version you could possibly get. Obviously, someone like Stuart Baird, who Richard Donner worked with on like 6 different movies, one of the best in the business, probably demanded a high salary for things, but someone close to his level that knows how to construct a film, knows the nuances of how to work with all these different pieces of footage and reconstruct it in a very smooth type of fashion would have been much more preferable. But there's a very interesting type of thing I discovered on my research for this video, is that certain video on-demand services have a version of the Donner cut that's actually 7 minutes longer. Now, this reintegrates more of Richard Lester's footage into the film, and that East Houston, Idaho sequence in the middle of the film extends out the first encounter with the deputy and sheriff with Zat Ursa Nan, gets us up where they actually enter into the town and have the arm wrestling sequence in the diner, and a section of footage that was not in the theatrical Lester cut, but in the extended TV version, where this kid gets on his horse to kind of ride off to get help, then Nan chucks the red light he got off the police car at the kid. Now, this kind of smooths out the entire sequence in the middle of the film, where I felt in the official Donner cut on DVD and Blu-ray, it was kind of abruptly kind of cut here and there because it didn't really kind of have a very organic progression of events there. This kind of evens that out. Don't know if that affects the 50% or more footage that Richard Donner needed to have to maintain his DGA credit on the film. I guarantee you Donner did not approve that version. He did not go back in and say, let's throw the other guy's stuff back in. Because he clearly, in interviews, shows he does not have a reverence for Richard Lester, who has not talked to him in 40 years. But there's such an interesting thing with the 2 different endings employed by the different directors here, because obviously with the Lester cut, you've got this sort of silly little magic kiss thing that wipes away Lois's memory of Clark actually being Superman and things go off, to that wonderful ending there where he flies back to the White House with the top of it and the flag and everything like that and says to the president, "Sorry, I've been away so long, I'll never let you down again," which I think is a wonderful little beat to end the film on. With Donner's, it kind of goes off of the kind of original intentions of the ending of the first Superman movie, where it was supposed to be a cliffhanger where one of Luthor's sabotaged missiles was going to be launched into space and break through the Phantom Zone. Obviously, that's not what the theatrical version or any version of Superman the movie ended up being, but that's the way Donner decided to adapt it for his purposes. And so in this entire thing, the world turning back around and reversing time thing does not happen at the end of the first film based on what Donner constructs for his version of Superman 2. Instead, he uses that for the ending of Superman 2, which is a little bit more egregious than it is in the first film because he actually turns back time to the complete beginning of the entire film, basically telling you the entire 2 hours you just sat here watching this film never happened, and there's no consequences from anything that happened in that entire storyline there. So it does bother me. It's just a lot more kind of, Superman doesn't have to deal with anything. He can just turn time back anytime he wants to, and just like the entire story you just watched means absolutely nothing. So as silly as the little magic kiss is in Lester's version, I really like how Lester directed that scene. I love the performances from Reeve and Kidder, just wonderful, dramatic, emotional beats in that whole thing. I think it works towards the conclusion of the storyline, and at least something that Superman has to at least deal with the consequence of, like, everything that happened with the Kryptonian villains. At least leaves that open for him to have a little bit of a resonance towards that, and now he's gonna kind of go off without Lois. That Lois is kind of left in this state where she doesn't know it, but he's got to live with that knowledge the entire time. So it's still a flawed ending, but I think the Lester one just has a little bit more emotional payoff for the entire storyline there. And obviously the kind of weird thing with the guy at the truck station, all the trucker and whatnot, the bully gets kind of shuffled around in a weird type of way in the Donner cut, where it's like it happens where Clark goes back after he turns time back to beat up the bully for something that happened in a timeline that no longer exists now. So now Clark's technically the bully because the guy never roughed him up, never did anything in this version. So it's a little sloppy here and there. That's the problem. It's a little bit of a sloppy put together type of thing. Donner wants to get all his footage in, but it doesn't quite work together because the concepts don't entirely align properly with the footage they have to what they want to do with it. So it's a very difficult thing to judge overall because it's not a complete product. It's not a complete version of the film that works on every single level and follows a complete coherent storyline. There are problems with it, that it has a potential. I love the potential, the promise that this version gives you, that if you had that chance way back when, it would have come out probably as a very fantastic film. It just doesn't quite work as this sort of patchwork together type of version of it. It just has some problems with it. So I do prefer the Lester cut overall, because the Lester cut, even though silly, campy things aside, it's a flowing narrative, keeps on regular pace, everything fits together very well. It's very organically building storyline, all that type of stuff. I think it just generally works as a complete narrative. Donner cut just has a little too much jarring qualities here and there that doesn't quite flow cohesively all together in itself. But that's a lot of stuff you guys can talk about in the comments below. There's a lot of stuff to really just dig into, and there's a whole bunch of stuff I just decided not to go into because there's tons of stuff I could get into if I was going beat by beat, scene by scene to get into all these little things. There's so much stuff. So guys, hit up the comments below, ask me any additional little things about what I feel about one version versus another in terms of particular details here and there. So guys, definitely like to hear what you guys think and feel about it, because Superman 2, if you put together a version that kind of didn't favor one director's footage over another, you could really come together with a fantastic film. But as it is, you kind of have to kind of lean this way or lean that way, so it's kind of like, it's a little bit off balance. If you could get a little bit more of the stuff that kind of got the best of both worlds, it could be really fantastic type of stuff. You get that tone right in the perfect zone for everything, guys. So, take care, guys. We're doing well. And get your comments and all that wonderful stuff. I really appreciate it so much. So take care, guys. Thanks much. Bye-bye.